Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sibo Wu, and I'm a Dean's Ambassador of the UC Riverside School of Public Policy. I'm excited to welcome you all to today's installment of the Water Seminar Series. I will be serving as the MC for this seminar, which is titled Colorado River Shortage Impacts in Central Arizona. Today's seminar is part of the Water Economics and Policy Outreach activities of the UCR School of Public Policy called Water Dialogue, Getting to Know Your Water Agencies and Policymakers, which is led by Dr. Mehdi Nemati. Water policy design and implementation involve the policymakers, the agencies that apply the policy, and the public that is subject to the policy. California has long been subject to many water policy interventions. Opening a dialogue among the public, the water agencies and policymakers will enhance the implementation of better and more effective water policies. You can learn more by going to waterdialogue.ucr.edu. Before I hand it over to our special guest for her presentation, I would like to first quickly go over the format for this event. Our guest speaker will present for about 30 to 45 minutes. Afterwards, we will hold an audience Q&A for about 15 minutes. For our online audience, please input your questions via the Q&A feature on Zoom webinar. And for our in-person audience, please raise your hand and I will walk over and hand you a mic so that our Zoom audience can hear you. At this point, I'm delighted to introduce to you all our guest speaker for today's seminar. Dr. Catherine Sorensen served for many years as Director of Phoenix Water Services, as well as Director of the City of Mesa Water Resources Department. In these roles, she was responsible for the delivery of safe, clean, and reliable water for millions of Arizonans. She also significantly advanced the sustainable management of water resources in Arizona and the Colorado River Basin. Dr. Sorensen earned a PhD in agricultural and resource economics from Texas A&M University and a Bachelor of Arts in economics from the University of Michigan. In her position at Arizona State University, she oversees the research efforts of the Kyle Center for Water Policy. She also serves as a professor of practice at the Walsh College of Public Service and Community Solutions. Lastly, she is a senior global future scientist at the Julian Wrigley Global Future Laboratory and is a member of the Colorado River Research Group. We are delighted to have her with us today. Please join me now in welcoming Dr. Sorensen.
Thank you. Should I trade you?
Okay.
Oh, it's good. Okay.
Yes, let me try. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That was a very kind introduction. If it's okay with the format, I would prefer if people interrupt me with questions, is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I think it creates a really nice dialogue. Thank you so much for including me today. I'm really thrilled to be here. I have never been to your campus before. I have to ask, what is your mascot? I don't know.
Scotty.
Scotty. Okay, so is it actually a dog? What is it?
Scotty the bear.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's a bear. Okay. Well, I'm very happy to be here at the home of Scotty the bear. So thank you for including me. I'm going to be covering a lot of stuff today. I hope you interrupt me. There's a lot to be said about the Colorado River, particularly in Central Arizona. These are just some of the tools and reports that you can find on the Kyle Center website that relate to the topic here today. So I hope you visit our website and become familiar with some of our resources. So this will shock no one, but Arizona is a dry state. And for all that, this may be what you think of when you think of Arizona. It's good to be here in Riverside because you guys also have to tolerate very high temperatures in a desert environment. And so you know that this is the problem of the West, right? The Western states are arid, with the exception of the Pacific Northwest. we rely on very large water projects, and we move water hundreds of miles for farming, for industry, for our cities, for all of our uses. This is our way of life, is moving water where it needs to go. The other thing that we all kind of have in common is our aquifers and our reliance on groundwater, and I'm going to talk about that as well. The media likes to portray our water issues this way. I think they do the same thing to you guys here in Southern California. And I get it. The media has to sell stories, and stories of fear sell well. And a lot of people, particularly in the media, can't figure out why we build cities in the desert. But I think this framing is wrong. And I want to give you a sense of place in Central Arizona. We didn't build we did sort of build a city in the middle of the desert. That is true, but it's a civilization that has existed there since time immemorial. This is about a half hour, 45-minute drive from my house. This is the Salt River. Those are some wild horses, and you can see the kind of dramatic and beautiful scenery that we enjoy in Central Arizona, just like you enjoy here. I love your mountains. They're gorgeous. I wish I had time to go hike them. But the Phoenix area is about here-ish. And of course, it is where some of Arizona's largest rivers come together. Because humans can't live without water, of course. So humans live where the water is. As these rivers have flowed through these mountain valleys, they of course deposited a large amount of groundwater. The city of Phoenix is located in an alluvial plain, meaning that the river flows through these desert sands, deposits its water over time, and we are fortunate to enjoy very large aquifers as a result of that. There's a lot of groundwater. And the same is true for this area and for much of the West, this basin and range territory. So although surface water supplies tend to be small compared to the more temperate parts of our country, we are blessed to have this groundwater resource that we can rely on as well. And in Arizona in particular, we have been an agricultural valley since time immemorial. Oops, I got the wrong one. Native Americans were the first to figure out that you could divert the flows of the Salt and Verde rivers through canaling that takes advantage of elevation. Elevation is highest at the eastern part of the Valley of the Sun and lowest down here. And so by diverting the flows of the river, you can move water across vast areas and feed enormous fields of agriculture that were the mainstay of the Valley of the Sun since time immemorial, and agriculture still exists in our valley to this day. But like much of the West, our aquifers hold fossil groundwater, meaning that the water in these aquifers is very, very old and is not annually renewed at any significant rate. So to the extent that you pump it faster than it's replenished, it's just gone. And it won't really come back. And that's particularly a problem for the sponginess, the elasticity of the aquifers. You can recharge aquifers artificially. I know you do that here in Southern California. We do a lot of that in Arizona. I'll talk about that. But if you pump too much too quickly, you lose that elasticity and the aquifer loses its ability to be recharged. Okay. So like I said, these canals, and what's interesting about these canals, you can see here, the modern canal system that the city of Phoenix and the Valley of the Sun rely on is actually based on the ancient one, which I think is just really cool. But yeah, so agriculture has been a part of our landscape basically forever, and up until modern times and continuing today. We, of course, learned to use the flows of the Salton Verde River for this agriculture, but particularly with the invention of electric pumps, we also learned to pump our groundwater and to use it. And we used it mostly for agriculture. Agriculture in climates like ours is very efficient. You can grow a lot of crops because you have an almost year-round growing season. So if you have enough sun and you have enough water, you're not really constrained in any other way. And that's why a lot of alfalfa and cotton and other very thirsty crops are grown in the desert Southwest. So farmers in Yuma, Arizona, and I think it's similar in the Imperial area, can get like 10 cuttings of alfalfa a year. In Montana, in high cold places, you might get 1 or 2. So it's very efficient here, but it is very water intensive. So Arizona used a lot of its groundwater to grow crops. While we were using this fossil groundwater to grow crops in central Arizona, we were also, of course, fighting with California over the Colorado River. We were fighting for federal authorization to build the Central Arizona Project Canal, which delivers Colorado River water from the main stem on the border of Arizona and California through a 336-mile canal into the cities of Phoenix and Tucson. So imagine this. Let's go back to like the 50s. Arizona is, compared to California, is just puny, right? California has always had the population and the political power. Arizona's population, particularly back then, was very small. Our delegation to Congress, very small. We didn't hold a lot of power. But one thing Arizona knew was that if we didn't use our Colorado River water, California would, right? That's how the law of prior appropriation works. The most senior water right holder gets to use the water, whatever is left goes to the junior, and on until all the water is used up. Arizona knew that if it didn't find more uses for its Colorado River water, that California would be happy to use whatever Arizona didn't. So we fought for decades to build the Central Arizona Project Canal so that we could make better use of our Colorado River water and, frankly, keep it away from California. That was a major initiative. For those of you who don't recognize the glasses, and there's no reason you would if you don't come from Arizona, this is Barry Goldwater, a fabled Arizonan libertarian who at one point ran for president. But so we're fighting for California for federal authorization to build this canal. Finally, in 1968, which is a year of both celebration and infamy for Arizonans, we received federal authorization to build the Central Arizona Project Canal and make more use of our Colorado River water. The price, though, that California extracted from us, because remember, they're bigger and more politically powerful, the price that California extracted from us was a deal that all the water delivered through that canal into central Arizona to the cities of Phoenix and Tucson would be cut first in times of shortage before water uses in California were cut. So that was kind of the deal we had to make to get the authorization for the canal. That was the price that California extracted from us. So this is a picture of former Secretary of the Interior, Bruce Babbitt. I tried to find a picture of him looking really stern for this story I'm about to tell you, but it turns out he's a really nice guy. And so like, this is the best I could do. But then Secretary of the Interior Babbitt told Arizonans that if we didn't get our pumping of fossil groundwater in order, if we didn't clean up our backyard, that the federal money to build the Central Arizona Project Canal would be in jeopardy. So he basically laid out a threat. We'll never know if he would have followed through with it, but he laid out a threat saying, you got to regulate your groundwater. Otherwise, you're not getting this canal to deliver Colorado River water into Central Arizona. And you can imagine Arizonans, like anywhere, like here in California, did not want to regulate their groundwater, right? People very rarely enter into voluntary agreements to regulate groundwater. It's something that is very contentious. But what we liked even less than regulating groundwater was the idea of California continuing to use our Colorado River water. So we got our house in order. We enacted very meaningful groundwater regulation in Central Arizona. I think to this day, it is still one of the most progressive groundwater management laws that you will find not only in this country, but on this planet. It is extremely progressive. It is a really solid law. Through the Groundwater Management Act, basically, it for the most part disallows the depletion of fossil groundwater for growth, for building new subdivisions. It includes mandatory conservation requirements. It essentially mandated really massive investment in alternative water supplies, in renewable water supplies, in reclaimed water, and other things. But agriculture was grandfathered into our Groundwater Management Act. So they are allowed to continue to pump groundwater. But the important point being that Arizona enacted very meaningful groundwater regulation. It has, for the most part, been very, very successful. And the Valley of the Sun is one of the few places where groundwater stores are not in decline. We managed to stabilize and in some cases improve those groundwater stores. Like I said, we've been reclaiming and reusing our wastewater for many, many decades. When you live in the desert, you know how valuable every last drop of water is. Reclaimed water is no exception. The next thing that we will do in the Valley of the Sun when it comes to reclaimed water is start to drink it as either direct or indirect potable reuse. Some people think that's icky, but that's why I like to remind people that we are all downstream of Vegas. And what happens in Vegas doesn't stay in Vegas. It comes right down the Colorado River and into your taps. You're already drinking it. There's no drop of water on this planet that isn't already recycled. So it's something we have to deal with. Actually, so we don't do direct or indirect potable reuse right now in the Valley of the Sun. Most of the reclaimed water actually goes to the Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station, which is west of Phoenix. The Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station is the only nuclear facility that we know of in the world that is not located on a major body of water. And it is out in the desert, providing the benefits it does to our community because of the reuse of reclaimed water. That's kind of interesting. I'm going to skip this slide. So we passed the Groundwater Management Act in 1980. In 1990, we passed additional laws that allow for the banking of water into our aquifers. You guys are doing this in Southern California as well. Basically, you take surface water flows and you let them, you design special facilities to let that water percolate down into the aquifers. We do have the science to show that this has been successful. And like I said, there are parts of our aquifer that are actually improving because of this recharge. So this has been really, really successful. In Arizona, there's a market for this. Like you can bank water. The state keeps track of who banks water and how much. And you can create what's called a long-term storage credit, which is basically a banked water credit that you can withdraw at a later date. And there's a really, for those of you who are economists in the room, there's a really robust market in the creation and sale of these long-term storage credits. One of the tools we have at the Kyle Center, this is just a screenshot from it, but we actually created a tool where you can go in GIS and see who has banked water, where it is, and how much has been banked in central Arizona. So, I mean, I guess my point, and I will get to Colorado River shortage, but my point is we have these aquifers, but they're old, and we got to manage them really carefully, or else they'll just be gone. And I think that our management scheme is best in the world, at least that I can find. It's very strong. But because of all the previous decades of over pumping, mostly but not exclusively to grow crops, while we have stabilized our aquifers in the Valley of the Sun, and in some cases improved it, we're working from a really big hole. And the problem is that to the extent you start pulling that water back out, all that banked water, you start digging yourself deeper again. So it's a really critical issue. And what stinks about that is that things are about to get a lot worse. So let's talk about the Colorado River system. So you guys probably know this, but it sustains a very significant population. It is the river of the Southwest. It sustains a huge amount of agriculture, some of the most productive agriculture in the country. It includes the iconic spaces of the West. 7 states share the Colorado River: Arizona, California, and Nevada in the lower basin, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico in the upper basin, 30 tribes, and the Republic of Mexico. So I like to say that management of the Colorado River system is handled through the most complex governance system ever created by human beings. It's called the Law of the River. It's a series of international treaty compacts between the states, various court rulings, including up to the Supreme Court, of course, the laws of the 7 states, tribal water laws and sovereignty. It's really, really complex. And you can imagine getting states to agree on anything is really difficult. Getting states and tribes to agree on anything is also very difficult. Getting tribe states and the Republic of Mexico to agree on anything is really tough. So it's a very, very complicated governance structure. And because of its complicated nature, essentially it's really difficult to do anything other than by total consensus. And that's hard to achieve. Because it is a prior appropriation system, water not used by one entity is available for use by the next. And of course, the whole system of prior appropriation then maximizes water use, right? So of course, it creates an over-allocated river system because we're maximizing use. That's what we're doing. And the scientists are telling us that the basin is aridifying. It is becoming more arid. They say that the flows of the river may decline by another 25 to 30%. The last 20 years was not just a drought, not just a mega drought. It was the worst drought that paleoscientists could find in 1,200 years. So it was horrible. The guidelines that describe the water levels and how Lakes Powell and Meade are operated, meaning at what level the water is kept for hydropower, for recreation, for water supply, for agriculture. Those rules expire in 2026. The states and the tribes and the Republic of Mexico are negotiating as we speak on a near constant basis, trying to figure out what the rules might be after the expiration of these guidelines. But I'm not at the table. I don't know. But word is it's not going well. And it looks like there may not be agreement about that. And there is really no agreement on guidelines thereafter. So we've got an over-allocated river system that is in decline, probably due to climate change. And we've got operating rules that expire in like a little more than a year. So it's pretty bad. Things are not good on the Colorado River. So it's not a resilient system. I love this slide. So discussing water rights of Western pastime. So of course, yeah, we fight a lot. But I, for one, believe in the value of this. I think we should fight because I can't think of anything more important than water to fight over. And fight doesn't literally mean fight like you see here, but it means have really difficult conversations and get mad at each other and have very diverse viewpoints and bring them all to the table. I think the only way that we can solve our problems on the Colorado River is to duke it out. And this is really, really important to Central Arizona and to our aquifers. So, like I said, because of 1968, because of California's power over Arizona, our entitlement to Colorado River water is lower in priority than that of Western Arizona and California. When there's not enough water to go around, our Colorado River water gets cut first. As we speak, about half of the water that is normally delivered through this canal remains in Lake Mead, either due to involuntary cuts, but also due to compensated conservation. We can talk about that. But the people that rely on the water here in Central Arizona, it's basically the urban corridor from Phoenix to Tucson, several tribes as well, mining companies, power companies, and of course, the municipal water providers. But to understand what the impact of Colorado River shortage will be in Central Arizona, you kind of also have to understand just who owns the water in the first place. And we have some tools on the Kyle Center website that can help you explore this. But you can see it's a mixed bag. On the main stem in Western Arizona, the Colorado River Indian Tribes owns the largest and most senior water right in the state. In Central Arizona, the Gila River Indian community owns the largest allocation. Phoenix and Tucson are not far behind. You can see some of the others there as well. But this water varies in priority. So within the canal, within the system that delivers Colorado River water into Central Arizona, there is a priority system. And that's kind of described here. So low priority on top and high priority on the bottom. The Auction Indian community has the highest priority of Colorado River water in Central Arizona. And then you can see kind of how this plays out. So there's different priorities within the canal itself. But then to understand those shortage impacts, you have to also understand not just who owns the water, not just what priority it is, but then what do people use it for? What is it being used for? So sorry, this got cut off a little bit, but this is a chart of Colorado River water use among the cities in Central Arizona that have an allocation of Colorado River water. If it's blue, it means that the city is actually using it for tap water. They're drinking it. If it's green, they're delivering it to create long-term storage credits that I talked about. They're banking it. If it's yellow, they're using it to water turf facilities, parks, schools, cemeteries, golf courses. And if it's orange, they're also using it to recharge aquifers, but in many cases, they're not creating a long-term storage credit because they're pulling it right back out. So they're actually just using the aquifer almost like a treatment plant, where they're letting the water go into the aquifer, but then they're pulling it right back out through wells. You guys do that in Southern California as well, I believe. So that's how the different municipal water providers are using the water. And this gives you a similar but slightly different picture. This is tap water sources of the municipal water providers in Central Arizona. This light blue or white, I guess, that means groundwater. It means groundwater is the predominant tap water source. The dark blue is Colorado River water. The orange is Salt and Verde River water, which is our local river. And one entity has access to Agua Fria River water. But yeah, so you can see in Central Arizona, a lot of the municipal water providers have decided to use the aquifer to store water, but then pull it back out through wells. Really that's because for the most part, it is less expensive to continue to pump groundwater and then replenish or recharge your aquifer than it is to build surface water treatment plants. So that's how water is being used in Central Arizona. And that's just kind of a GIS map of it. If it's a darker color, it's an area that is more dependent on Colorado River water as tap water. Yeah. No, that's okay.
My area actually from Colorado River water, but it's recharge, right?
They're relying, but not necessarily. They're relying on groundwater. They could be using Colorado River water to recharge the aquifer, or they could be using some forms of Salt and Verde River water or reclaimed water, or they could just be pumping groundwater, fossil groundwater. Cities are allowed to pump a small amount of fossil groundwater. They can't do much, but they can do a little. So it basically means the water is coming out of a well, but it could originate from different sources. If that makes sense. Okay. In the city of Phoenix in particular, which I'm obviously most familiar with, where the heck is Phoenix? Phoenix. Where are you? Tucson. Oh my gosh, why am I not seeing Phoenix? Oh, thank you. Phoenix gets about 40% of its water comes from Colorado River. Nearly 60% from the Salt and Verde River, and a very, very small amount of groundwater. Phoenix made the intentional choice decades ago. I had nothing to do with it. Phoenix made the intentional choice to avoid pumping wells to preserve that fossil groundwater for the future. Okay. Again, we have a tool on the Kyle Center website that shows you exactly what happens under different levels of Colorado River water availability in the Central Arizona Project Canal, exactly how much water different entities still have access to, and the fun legal flavors it comes in. So feel free to go explore that. But here's the punchline. Shortage impacts in Central Arizona include the loss of the lowest priority water that farmers in Central Arizona were relying on, mostly in Pinal County, which is kind of in between Phoenix and Tucson. But they do have the right to go back to groundwater pumping because our 1980 Groundwater Management Act grandfathered their groundwater pumping. So they can fall back to groundwater. Shortage means the loss of a water supply that we use very extensively to recharge and replenish our aquifers. And that is critically important in our state. It also means that as those cities that rely on Colorado River water directly as tap water for drinking water, they have to fall back on an alternative water supply to continue to meet tap water needs. And that is most likely to be groundwater or that previously banked water. So that means that we will withdraw more water from wells. And the other issue is that Colorado, because of the priority system in our in central Arizona, Colorado River water doesn't necessarily flow to the surface water treatment plants. It flows in priority. And maybe that's to a surface water treatment plant, but maybe it's not. And so there is some vulnerability to direct use of tap water, of Colorado River water used for tap water. There is some vulnerability to shortage, which is not good. And we kind of modeled that out. You can read this. We wrote a paper about the impacts of Colorado River shortage to cities in central Arizona. And we modeled out at different amounts of Colorado River water available in the CEP canal. You can see as there's less and less available, we start having real problems at some of the surface water treatment plants. And those are some really scary vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. Okay. Phoenix in particular is one of the cities that uses Colorado River water directly as tap water. Like I said, about 40% of Phoenix's supply. Phoenix, so basically roughly below this canal here. This canal comes off of the Salton Verde River system, which is that ancient canal system I showed you first up. So basically south of this line, the tap water is fed with Salton Verde River water. And the Salton Verde River system is pretty resilient. It's a pretty good system, and it's locally managed and it's not over allocated. So there's some resiliency and reliability here. But up in this kind of lighter blue area, this is the part of Phoenix that's dependent on Colorado River for tap water. And so Phoenix actually invested, depends on how you measure it, but something like $500 million in an enormous transmission main and pump system to be able to move water from the Salton Verde River system up into parts of Phoenix that are reliant on Colorado River supplies, so that it would be able to continue to meet demands during shortage. But not all the cities have done this, and there's different variabilities to Colorado River shortage, depending on each municipal water provider's kind of portfolio of water supplies. So, due to all these factors, the story of Colorado River shortage in central Arizona is really a story of groundwater depletion. And for all that our 1980 Groundwater Management Act has been very successful, like I showed you, we were already in a pretty big hole. And to the extent we start pumping those wells again, we're digging ourselves deeper. And that's really problematic. We also recently, the Department of Water Resources determined that all the groundwater in the Valley of the Sun is essentially spoken for, is what I'm going to say. They don't like to use the word allocated because we don't allocate groundwater. We have pump rights in our state. It's not an allocation. But essentially, they determined that all the groundwater is spoken for. And as a result, put a halt to groundwater dependent new subdivisions. So you can still build a new subdivision in central Arizona in the Valley of the Sun, but if you're going to build it, it can't be on groundwater. So that's kind of, so that's problematic because we're looking at Colorado River shortage and we're looking at a groundwater system that is basically spoken for, fully allocated. But of course, people keep moving to Arizona. It's a free country. We offer a great quality of life, more affordable homes than in other regions, a really strong job market. And of course, our development industry is powerful. And I'm sure the same is true here in Southern California. Our home builders and developers hold a lot of sway and are very powerful interests. And those pressures are real. This moratorium on the ability to develop new subdivisions based on groundwater is in place right now. It is our version of Portland's urban boundaries. Phoenix will never be Portland. Portland will never be Phoenix, but it's our version of boundaries. I don't know if it'll hold. I don't know. There's a lot of pressure in the legislature to loosen those rules. Yeah.
To identify the water sources, like local pipeline.
We do. So as part of the, let me get off of Portland. I love this picture, but I'm going to get off of it. So as part of the 1980 Groundwater Management Act, the state enacted rules for assured water supplies. The requirement in Central Arizona is that you show a 100-year assured water supply before you subdivide land and grow. It's a very complicated process to prove up 100 years of water. You can imagine, you know, your filing to the Department of Water Resources is about this thick. But yeah, you have to show that you have enough supplies physically, legally, and financially available to meet your current demands and the demands you project for 10 years for 100 years. And only a very small portion of that can actually be fossil groundwater pumping. The remainder has to be renewable water supplies. So it's really tough. Yeah. Well, it's interesting you ask. So yes, so the question was, okay, if you have to prove 100 years of water supply and we got Colorado River shortage coming and groundwater is all spoken for, how are you going to show that in the future, right? How are you going to show 100 years of water supplies? And what's interesting about that is that, so municipal water providers receive a designation of a 100-year assured water supply, but they have to go back into the Department of Water Resources at least every 15 years to kind of re-show it, to reprove it. So it's like a rolling requirement of 100 years. And most of the cities are due to do that in the next couple of years. And what they're going to show, I don't know.
So they're good for now.
They're good for now. But coming up really shortly, we might see some real constraints. So for example, by rule right now, if you have a contract for Colorado River water that is deemed to be worth 100 years of water, well, it's not going to be next time, right? Because we're already in shortage. So it's going to be really interesting to see what water supplies Central Arizona municipal water providers fall back on. How am I on time?
Yes, we still have time.
I still have time. Okay, good. Thank you for that question. That's actually really important. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years. The city of Phoenix is due to come in, and all the other major cities are due to come in and try to reprove that 100-year assured water supply. It'll be interesting to see how many can, right? I would imagine that you'll see an uptick in the use of reclaimed water. There are some attempts to, they're not successful yet, but there are some attempts to basically use fossil groundwater from some of the aquifers in Western Arizona that is allowed under state law. So basically, you deplete someone else's aquifer. I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying that's allowed in state law. So we might see the importation of someone else's groundwater. And there is still some water available through, for example, some tribes do still have some Colorado River water that can be leased. So there are some supplies out there, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough. Okay. My point is that while we have these large and productive aquifers in Central Arizona, we have managed them very carefully for the long term because they have to last for generation upon generation, or else Phoenix's very existence is threatened. They are not for the purpose of solving the over-allocation of the Colorado River. They are for emergency use. They are break glass in case of emergency supplies. They cannot sustain the over-allocation of the Colorado River. And since I'm in California, I know, maybe not you guys in the room, but maybe a couple of people on Zoom are sitting here going, well, hell yeah, we can. And I like the, yes, let's solve the Colorado River over allocation problem by cutting Central Arizona off. That is what that is law because of 1968, the Colorado River Basin Storage Project. Let's cut off Central Arizona, make them fall back on their aquifers, and we're good. Let's do it. Like, I get it. 1 minute. Okay. But that's not tenable for the long term. And maybe you don't personally care about groundwater in Central Arizona, but 7 million people do. Enormous military complexes do. The Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Facility, which is now in North Phoenix, does. We care. We care about Central Arizona's groundwater, and we need to guard it carefully and manage it carefully. Yes, it can be a temporary fallback, but it should not be a long-term one. And we need to find other ways to solve over allocation on the Colorado River system. And I believe I'm exactly out of time. So I'll stop there. Thanks. My pleasure.
Presentation. So now let's move on to the Q&A session. But unfortunately, we only have time for your questions. So if anyone in the person audience has any questions, please raise your hand and I will come to you and hand you a mic. So for the audience in our Zoom webinar, please go ahead and enter your question via the Q&A feature and I'll post your questions afterwards.
Thank you, Catherine. So you mentioned the negotiations are going on right now, and there are people in the room. Can you talk a little bit about who is in the room for the students that they don't might not know?
Who's at the table
Who's at the
negotiating?
table? Yeah.
So that's a really interesting question. Who negotiates the Colorado River? Well, each of the 7 states has a principal, and that principal is the official person at the table. The tribes have representation to varying degrees through the United States Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Justice. Mexico, of course, has its own delegation, but there's a lot of controversy about who's at the table, right? And there's a lot of thought spent on who should be at the table and how do we represent a broader set of perspectives and ideas. And that's a difficult problem to solve because anyone who's been in negotiations understands that the more people you have, the harder it is to come to agreement. And that is complex, right? Like negotiations are not going to work if there's 100 people in the room, but we need to be sure to be representing all of the interests that are there, and certainly the tribal interests, which in the past were, not included. So that's a really, really difficult thing to accomplish. That's a tough balance. But I think it is helpful to consider that you don't necessarily have to be at the table to exert influence. And what matters is influence. And so I think there's a couple of different ways that you can come at that. But yeah, honestly, it's 7 states, tribes, the Republic of Mexico, they get in a room and literally yell at each other. I mean, that is honestly how it happens. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So can I please just move on to the Zoom audience first?
Sure.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So one of the audience from our Zoom webinar asked, why would say Arizona development industry was very powerful?
Why? I'm sorry, what?
So why would say Arizona development industry?
Oh, why is our development industry powerful? Yeah. So our Central Arizona's economy is only recently particularly diverse. For many decades, our main industry was home building, right? Because we got a lot of land and you could throw up subdivisions, 1,000 acres at a time, plenty of demand for people to move in. And especially back, it used to be mostly retirees. That's really changed. Our economy is much more diverse now, but home builders, they just hold a lot of sway with our legislature. I'm sure it's similar here in California. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, it's for the, okay. Yeah, worst case scenario, wouldn't the market just drive the price of living in Arizona to be too high to where a certain amount of people would need to leave? Wouldn't that also be like a solution to the crisis?
Yeah. It could be, but I think it's unlikely. The cost of water is certainly high, right? It costs a lot of money, for example, to go acquire a lease from a tribe. It costs a lot of money to go try to buy out a farmer in Western Arizona. It costs a lot of money to pump groundwater in a Western aquifer and import it into Central Arizona. All of those things are expensive. But compared to the cost of providing tap water, the pipes, the pumps, the treatment plants, the wells, all those things, it's actually still relatively small. That's really where the expense lies, is in the provision of tap water to every home. It's the predominant cost, and I think is likely to remain so for a considerable period of time. So I think at some point, maybe, I think that it won't be soon. It won't be soon. Yeah. But the cost of land has really increased, right? And we're kind of pushing the boundaries of the Valley of the Sun. I mean, what's left to be developed is less desirable, has more problems in terms of infrastructure and floodplain and all those other problems. So I think maybe the cost of land and ultimately housing plays more of a role. But I think it's important to recognize that people like to think that population growth is the problem that is creating water scarcity. And that's really not the case. I know that sounds odd, but really land use dictates water use. And in our hot desert sun, it's the same here in your valley. Agriculture uses by far more water per acre than a subdivision does. So it takes about on the order of 6 acre-feet per acre to grow alfalfa or these other thirsty crops, especially if you're cropping year round. Urban water uses in Central Arizona are on the order of 1.2 acre-feet per acre. So actually, ironically, since the Valley of the Sun has been agricultural since time immemorial, as we grew and urbanized and converted from farming to urban uses, on whole, we use less water. The state of Arizona uses roughly the same amount of water in total that it did in the 1950s, but our population has grown by, I don't know, like 6 million. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So here is another question from our Zoom audience. Dina asked, you mentioned that the negotiations are not making good progress. What will happen if negotiations fail? Is there a mechanism to enforce a new law of the river, or it will be a new law to be effective on the stakeholders?
Okay, before I answer that question, let me just say, I'm not in the room. I'm not privy. I don't have inside information. Like the rest of you, I hear stuff from people. So whatever I say, take it with a grain of salt. But yes, the rumor is things are not going well. There is disagreement between the upper basin, the lower basin. There's always disagreement between Arizona and California. It's almost like our hobby is fighting over water, right? That's what we do. So yeah, it's not going well. The fallback. So so the operating guidelines that prescribe losses and water levels in our major reservoirs, if they expire, we fall back on guidelines that were developed in the 60s, I believe it was. But I think what will happen is some form of litigation, and then we'll all run to Congress and have a big fight. But I don't have inside knowledge, so whatever I say, take it with a grain of salt.
Well, thank you. Is there a question from our inside? Okay.
Thank you. So you mentioned the overallocation of Colorado river water. What are California's fallbacks? Like, instead of, allocating a whole bunch of water to California, what do we have instead? I know
You guys are in pretty good shape. So let me go back to this map of the Colorado River system. So although California contributes almost nothing to the river, look at your watershed. You import a vast amount of it, 4.4 million acre feet, to your agricultural fields in Imperial and Coachella valleys. And then, of course, where we are here, to the cities of Southern California. But those, like I said, because of the law in 1968, your priority to Colorado River water is higher than Central Arizona. So the first thing that California would presumably argue for is, well, hell, cut off Phoenix and Tucson. But even that, the problem is, even that is probably not enough. So the Colorado River is over allocated at least to the tune of 1.5 million acre feet. That would take a zero to Arizona, right? Zero, well, not to Arizona, to Central Arizona. The guys in Yuma would still get water. So, okay, 1.5 million acre feet gone, there's still a problem. The scientists are saying that in certain years and certain times, we in the lower basin are going to have to cut something more like 2 to 4 million acre feet. So to put that in perspective, this is not just Central Arizona's problem. This is also Southern California's problem. But you do have fallbacks. You have this wonderful thing called the Pacific Ocean. So it's a little bit easier for you guys to fall back on desal. You've got reclaimed water. Right now, a lot of your reclaimed water just flows out into the ocean. I'd love to get my hands on some of that. And I know LA and San Diego and a lot of other places are beginning to make use of that water rather than letting it flow into the ocean. So that's a supply that you can fall back on. There's of course also local rivers. California has supplies it can fall back on, for sure. And I don't want anyone to walk away scared that their tap water is in danger, right? Because municipal water managers are smart. They know about this. They lay out long-term plans. They know how to deal with scarcity. They know how to make investments that make sure you have reliable tap water supplies. And there's no reason to think that won't be the case. But we got to fix this.
Yes, thank you. Unfortunately, that is all of time that we have for today's question. So,
Okay,
yes, thank you, Dr. Sorensen, for your presentation and for taking time out of schedule. And thank you to our audience members, both in person and on Zoom. We look forward to seeing you continue to join us at our upcoming School of Public Policy events. Next Thursday, November 21st, we will be hosting a community seminar by the Executive Director of UCDC, Dr. Tanya Golash-Boza. Her talk is titled, Before Gentrification, the Creation of DC's Racial Wealth Gap. You can learn more about events like these hosted by the UCR School of Public Policy by visiting our website at spp.ucr.edu. While you're there, you can also learn about our Master of Public Policy program and our newly launched combined BA and PP program. Additionally, you can listen to or watch our official podcast series, Policy Chats. Thank you again, everyone. Please help yourself to some pizza in the back. We look forward to seeing you at future events.